Good morning and welcome to the Point. Well, it's summertime. The legislature is taking a bit of a break over in the House. The Senate's still meeting, trying to come up with a deal on roads, but there's another important issue you'll be hearing more about in the fall, and that's how we regulate energy here in the state of Michigan. We sat down with a Republican chairman and Democratic vice chairman of that committee to find out their thoughts. Let's talk about energy. This is your committee and something that you have worked on for your entire time here in the legislature. We were talking before, it's complex, so you're going to have to keep it simple for lay people like me and many of our people listening, but it's important to everybody because the regulation or the standards that you and the legislature come up with are something we'll be living with for a long time. We've been under the current circumstance since you said 2008 was when that program went into place. That developed a number of things, including a renewable energy portfolio and all of those kind of things. Tell me what it is you would like to see done as we come up with some guidelines for Michigan and energy use.
Well, thanks, Rick. Great to be on. There's really two things that the reason why this year is the right time to be handling this issue. One is, you're right, 2008 we passed, the legislature passed an energy bill, an updated electricity bill, and that included mandates on certain kinds of energy efficiency, mandates on certain kinds of renewable energy, and then also provided a cap in terms of those that are able to go out on retail open access for the choice markets to pick their generating supplies. And so 2015 was when the goals for the renewable portfolio standard were set up. Those goals are being reached this year, and same with the energy efficiency goals. So this year so that's the first reason why this year makes sense to handle this. The second reason really is because of the EPA mandates coming down from Washington, D.C. and the federal government. If we don't make decisions here in Michigan for a Michigan plan, a Michigan First plan, they'll be making those decisions on Washington. We see how dysfunctional that city is, and we see what kind of challenges that Washington brings on our state. So we really need to have a long-term plan that concentrates on reliable energy, making sure that when you flick on that light, that the light goes on. That when you start up the manufacturing plant, that the widgets are coming out. And then, as we look at the next two years, we're looking at the closure of 9 coal plants because of these EPA regulations. So you need to have the reliability. We need to make sure we have affordable energy. So mandates and cookie cutter programs pushing cost up for our ratepayers, our families and small businesses is not the right way to go. And then also making sure that's an adaptable plan. I don't think energy with electricity is something that you have to do long-term investments for these large generating facilities and these plants. And so I think over the last 15 years, we've had 3 pretty radically different plans here in the state of Michigan. And I think we need to have an adaptable plan that will adapt to both the marketplace that's out there and adapt to new environmental regulations to make sure we have affordable, clean, and reliable energy.
Well, one of the things that we have used in Michigan, as we have around most of the country, for that reliable source of energy and a reliable source of product to create that energy has been coal. As you say, 9. And that sounds kind of scary because that seems like that would be a lot of energy generation. 9 of those plants you say are going to close in the next couple of years. Are we prepared, are our suppliers prepared to make up for that loss of generation?
That's the reason why we're having this debate, is because there is a real issue that's out there in terms of making sure that we have the capacity to have the reliable energy that our families and small businesses and farmers expect from us without huge price spikes, without a large increase in terms of energy costs. Michigan does have some of the higher rates in the Midwest region, and this is a plan that I think will get us to a more affordable rates to bring down and be more competitive with some of our neighboring states. You have the energy companies looking at, they've been purchasing some new plants, making sure that they have the capacity that's on there. But this is one of the few markets out there where you're mandated, probably the only market out there, where you're mandated to have a 15% oversupply of available capacity to make sure that we don't have rolling blackouts or brownouts here in the state. Remember California 15 years ago, they were down to about a 9% capacity oversupply, and that's when they started to see some rolling brownouts. And so economists and engineers feel that the 15% level is the right, and that's the challenge with other industries, is you don't have other industries where you have that mandate for reliability, that mandate to have the oversupply. And so we need to start looking at in terms of building these new power plants soon, and that means a surety in terms of the regulatory environment here in the state. And That's something that my plan does, is it goes back to a fully regulated system, making sure that the process goes to the Public Service Commission and moves away from these mandates, these cookie cutter mandates of picking out certain kinds of renewables or picking out certain kinds of energy efficiency. Let's go to what's called an integrated resource plan, where you're able to put everything on the table. You're able to look at it and see what makes the best sense for reliability and long-term cost savings for our families here in Michigan. Is it more energy efficiency programs? Should that be encouraged, and should that put in? Is that cheaper than building a new generating plant? Well, let's make sure that cost comparison is done. Or is it new transmission to build out from other wind farms or from hydroelectric facilities? And so we're trying to look at it in terms of a holistic way and a holistic package instead of just picking winners and losers in the marketplace.
The complexity of this became clear as you and I were talking before we started this interview. And it's not just about having that reliable supply, but knowing, as you just pointed out, that down the road they're going to be able to keep up with it. So as simply as you can, what would your plan do that's going to do that? Obviously, you talk about taking a holistic look and trying to include everything, but it doesn't do some of the things that we've seen in the past. For example, set a standard, a mandate that you have to have 10% or 20% or 30% of renewables by a particular date. So how do you get to, if part of the goal is to see more renewable energy sources, how do you get to that without a mandate?
Well, the federal government's already mandating certain kinds of regulations on pollutants and what's allowed and not allowed. That's why you're seeing the closure of some of these coal plants that are out there. And so this puts it on as saying, okay, what is the most cost-effective options? Is it energy efficiency? And so we should be encouraging that. Is it certain kinds of renewables, or is it natural gas? Is it a new nuclear plant? What makes the most sense for the ratepayers? And you need to have a diverse portfolio also. And so looking at what that, just like if you're an investor, you want to have a diverse portfolio, unless you bought Apple stock 10 years ago, then you probably wanted it all in there. But you want diversity. So you want natural gas, you want clean coal, you want nuclear, you want some alternatives, renewables, you want some clean hydro. And so as you look at it, right now natural gas is the low cost supplier. And it's a low pollution source too. It's 60% less carbon dioxide emissions. They don't have the mercury emissions of the other ones. And that's what's driving it right now, is the low price of natural gas that we see. And making sure that, if we're investing in natural gas, that we don't overinvest, so if we see price spikes down the way, that we don't get that. And so we're making it so that both the Public Service Commission, which oversees our electricity regulations and laws here in the state, and the Department of Environmental Quality, which oversees our environmental laws, are communicating right now. And so this law would allow them to actually begin to communicate, see what are the best cost options to have that clean energy future without picking out certain technologies that we do now. Right now, we count your traditional wind and solar as renewable sources, but we also count waste energy, current waste energy facilities. So instead of sending it into landfills, that it's diverted to produce energy, but not new ones. It counts the landfill gas that's captured at landfills. So if it goes to a landfill and it produces methane gas, you capture that and it uses it for energy. That's counted. It counts some biomass, but not other biomass. It has to be scrap wood, but not new fresh wood. So it really picks out some winners and losers. So we make it more technology neutral to say what makes the most economic sense and what's an all-the-above energy plan to make sure we have affordable, reliable, and adaptable energy plans, so that if market conditions change, if natural gas prices go up, that we're responding to those and that we have a variety of sources that are out there.
The governor gave a message on energy earlier this year, and he talked about some of the things that he saw as priorities, including having that 30% goal. Again, I don't think he was talking about that as a mandate, as we've seen it in the past. Do you think that the plan that you've talked about, that by the way you had hearings on and you had a lot of people testify on, do you think that is compatible with some of the goals that he set out? Yeah,
the plan I introduced, we've had about over 30, 40 hours worth of hearings on. We've had over 90 people come in and testify from around the state, really getting the committee up to speed on the energy issues and the electricity issues that are out there. The governor produced his plan a few months ago. I think there's a lot of similarities there. He concentrates a bit more in terms of finding those cost savings and eliminating energy waste, which I think are important, but let's make sure they're on a level playing field so that we're seeing what the best cost options are. He's looking at moving over to an integrated resource plan instead of having a bunch of artificial mandates. Let's set out some goals and see where they are. So I think there's some common ground with the governor and with Senator Knopf, the chairman of the Energy and Technology Committee over on the Senate side. I feel that this year we'll be able to come to an agreement to make sure that Michigan has a long-term, Michigan-centric energy plan that's adaptable for the future, and that's an all-of-the-above energy plan that makes our rates more competitive with surrounding states so we can grow jobs here in the state and we can grow the economy.
As I've read and as you have described it, this is very much about supply and about the certainty of that supply. One of the biggest interruptions in supply that we have seen in Michigan in recent years was really a failure of the grid, and it kind of pointed out how old the infrastructure is and how much more we rely on electricity than when they first started building it. Does your plan, have the conversations that you've had, address that in any form? Because everybody agrees that at some point there's going to have to be some updating, and it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, and that's that surety in terms of the generation, the distribution on our grid. It's a lot of times the weather effects takes down power lines, and so we need to continue to push the utilities to make sure that they're doing the vegetation management, that they're upgrading the substations and upgrading that infrastructure. And that's part of the reason why I believe going back to a fully regulated market provides that surety in terms of making sure that they're able to reinvest in that infrastructure and reinvest in the reliability. And I'm open, and I'm working with some of the members to see, are there some areas in terms of reliability matrices that the utilities should be meeting to make sure that we have that energy supply that doesn't include the flickering of the lights or rolling brownouts or other areas, and to make sure we have not just stable generation, but also a resilient network, transmission network and distribution network. And that's part of the reason why, as part of the larger conversation, we're looking at connecting the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula with transmission lines to make sure that there's the reliability also in the UP, as we see in the Lower Peninsula. Just like in the 50s, it took a lot of effort to build the Great Mackinac Bridge, and we're connected transportation-wise, but energy-wise, we're two separate continents, essentially. And I think if we're going to have an energy plan for Michigan that's built around Michigan residents, then we need to look at a robust overall state energy plan. I think that includes reliability in transmission, reliability in the distribution, and also in the generation.
Back with a view from the minority party, the Democratic vice chair, next to the point. How energy is used, how it is regulated, and how it's produced all impact what it costs us. And that's what they'll be considering in Lansing this fall. Now, the vice chair of the Energy Committee. Representative, let's talk about this. Energy, it's very important in your district. You've got some big energy producers, and it's obviously important for all of us. And so having some kind of a cohesive policy obviously makes sense. Getting to that agreement is not always the easiest thing to do. What's your view, as obviously you've worked with Representative Nesbitt as the vice chair, of what either he's trying to do or what you would like to see the legislature do when it comes to setting policy for the state?
Well, I think it's very important. It's very important to the state, ratepayers as well as businesses. So, and they're ratepayers also, but residential users obviously, and businesses and industry. I think we're trying to chart a course for the next several years forward. The last law was passed obviously in 2008, and the landscape has changed. You have a lot of forced plant closures for coal, so that generation needs to be replaced. I believe there is a reserve margin issue. Some people don't believe that, but I believe that is an issue. And I think we need to, the challenge is to come up with a plan that works for everybody and that's changeable if market conditions change also, and to try and keep rates low.
Well, obviously, when you say keep rates low, you just made a bunch of friends in West Michigan, because everybody wants to try to keep rates low. But the problem with that, as you've already identified, is you have to be able to be adaptable and changeable, because we don't know what costs are going forward. In fact, in talking with Representative Nesbitt, he was talking about right now that there are certain gases that are pretty inexpensive, but they may not be in 10 years or 5 years, so we don't know. So how do you approach that when the variables are kind of unknown? How do you make it flexible enough to expand or change with whatever dynamics come down the road?
Well, I would say this integrated resource planning process, and the governor has spoken about that at length. I believe that's been in Nesbitt's package also, Chairman Nesbitt's package. So I think that trying to write the law, and that is the challenge because the devil's always in the details, but to write the law where it would allow for the Michigan Public Service Commission to have some input on some of these issues also, whether it's cost of service, environmental concerns, what type of fuels based on the rule that's going to come down later this fall from the federal government on coal and carbon. I think that's definitely the trick. So I'd like to see something where I do believe in mandates in this case. The mandate has worked well for both renewables as well as energy efficiency, or as the governor puts it, reducing energy waste. So I think there still should be some sort of mandate. There's been talk of having it as a goal, but personally I feel that you can set as many goals as you want, and if you don't reach them, then you have to have a mandate to force us to get to those points.
By most standards, the mandate set in 2008 to get to 10% has been met.
Yes, supposedly by this year. So, and I think they were saying by the fall. So that formula, we don't want to take that away, and I think that several agree on that. But I think that there's more achievable when it comes to renewables as well as energy efficiency standards. You hear the low-hanging fruit argument. I believe there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I think there will be more fruit that will be made to hang lower with some of these retirements and with us moving to natural gas.
There are, what, 9, 10 coal-powered plants that are going to be closing in the state of Michigan. Are we going to have enough capacity to make up for that when those things go offline?
Well, and that's what I was getting to when I alluded to the margin reserve. Mm-hmm. So we have to, there's no way around it, if you will be mandated by the federal government to have a certain amount in the grid to keep the grid stable for reliability. We've seen what's happened in the Upper Peninsula with the mandating of running of a plant up there, and the rate, no matter what the cost is borne then by those UP ratepayers, and their electricity costs have gone way up. So we don't want to go into a situation, in my belief is, we don't want to get into a situation in Michigan where we're mandated to run plants by the federal government for stability reasons. So I think there's a way to do it. I think at this point it's going to be a mix of wind and natural gas generation, because we haven't even touched the surface when it comes to baseload power. And I know the energy gets very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, it does, but it's important to talk about that baseload, because I mean, there's also the mandate that you have to have 15% more energy than is necessarily going to be used. All of that comes into reliability, but talk about renewables in the baseload.
Sure, so many renewables are not considered baseload because of the fact that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. If you use the examples of solar power or wind power, obviously they're only running when you have sunshine and wind. So the trick is, what do you do when that isn't happening? And if you're relying on those to power the grid and they're not available, what happens? Now, some people say you could bring power in from other areas. To me, I think it's better off to have Michigan-based generating capacity, because then the jobs are here and the tax base is here. So I think that's an important thing to look at. Hence, mandating that there should be a certain percentage. Now, people could argue on what that percentage and what that mix of energy is. Baseload power is something that's always on. So, for example, we're a coal-heavy state. Coal burners burn around the clock. So they're easy to keep burning, they're hard to shut off. Same with nuclear plants. I happen to have a nuclear plant and a coal plant, both in the district I represent in southeastern Michigan. So the energy generation is an economic driver, plus it's baseload. So if you close down these baseload plants and only replace it with wind and solar that aren't considered baseload, don't run with a capacity factor in the 80s, 90s percentages, because things have to come down offline for maintenance and the rest. But if you don't have that baseload capacity, you don't have as certainty with the grid. So that's baseload versus, say, some renewables. And you could even throw in, energy storage and how that could play into this, but to me the technology isn't there yet.
Well, so when you think about that, then where do we go? Because obviously coal has its limitations as set by the federal government. We haven't built a new nuclear plant in this country in decades.
They're working on some in Georgia right now. Georgia and I want to say South Carolina.
Yeah,
so they're trying.
But those are some of the newer. I mean,
Yes.
those would be the first for a long, long time. And even just anecdotally, if somebody said tomorrow, "Hey, we want to put a new nuclear plant to replace some of these coals in Michigan," you're looking at a decade before it's online, I would assume.
It would be a long period of time, probably longer than the market conditions that would be either favorable or not favorable for that to happen. But that being said, in the district that I represent again, Detroit Edison has gotten a license to build another reactor on the same site as Fermi 2 in the Monroe area. So they're being proactive as much as they can be with some of this. Also, though, you have natural gas, which is considered baseload generation. It can run all the time as long as you have the fuel there. But natural gas, the fuel source, is subject to higher price fluctuations. With coal, yes, the price goes up and down, but it's a relatively flat curve. With natural gas, we've seen spikes in the last decade that have gone way up and way down. Currently, with the shale oil fracking boom, natural gas tends to be pretty cheap and has remained that way for quite a few years. But the problem becomes if it spikes, if the fuel cost spikes, you're going to see that pass down to the ratepayers and costs are going to go up. So if we replace this coal generation, which is relatively inexpensive, with natural gas, which is inexpensive now, but could become more expensive later, if we only do it with that, there could be some issues. So the increase in renewables, especially solar in my opinion, which is available at peak. Peak is when everybody's running their air conditioners. That's usually when the sun's shining. So that's helpful with that. With wind, it's kind of the opposite. But if we did a correct mix through the integrated resource planning process, I think we could get it right to have energy generation, Michigan-based energy generation, in the proper percentages that would help to keep rates low.
How much solar, for example, would you have to start making a dent? Are we talking about acres and acres and acres? What does it look like? Because I know that technology has changed too.
It's a lot. It's come down in cost. And I think that's why many of the utilities are saying their preferable mix at this point with the current market conditions would be wind and natural gas. Remember, natural gas is better than coal as far as carbon emissions, and that's what the federal law is regulating at this point. Natural gas does have some methane concerns going forward, but at this point that is not being regulated by the federal government, and it's a cleaner energy source. But it's still burning a fossil fuel. And you have to remember there's still things to think about with that. Whereas with wind, fuel cost is zero, but it's only there when it's blowing. With solar, fuel cost is zero, but it's only available when the sun is shining. But the capital cost of the generators themselves, the wind turbines and the solar panels, has come way down. So you don't have that initial price shock for doing it. But as far as solar goes, it would take a lot of solar panels. And that's why you can't just do one of those. That's why you need a mix of energy generation sources.
We're about out of time. Give me your best bet if you've got a crystal ball as you look at this process. Do you think that you're going to be part of the process that gets some kind of a comprehensive energy solution between the House and the Senate this year? Because I know a lot of people would like to see it done because of some of the mandates and other things that were set up that are in effect as of this year. There is some question about whether they expire or continue. Either way, are you hopeful that a bill gets done?
I'm definitely hopeful that it happens this year. I'm looking to the fall. One of the strategies may be to wait for that carbon rule to come out from the feds and see what the rule actually says to figure it out. There's signs of what it's going to say. The other option is maybe nothing will happen with it and it'll just continue as it is. But I would like to see something put in place that increases the renewable energy standard, definitely reduces energy waste, like I said, as the governor said, and possibly makes the plan changeable to where it works for a longer period of time.
We'll continue to follow this to see exactly what they come up with, and I'll have a final thought next. To the point. So if you happen by the Capitol this summer, you may not see many House members. They've already passed a bill that they say will fund roads going into the future. The Senate, however, is still looking into the idea. What the House passed is not likely to be what the Senate adopts, and what the Senate comes up with may not be to the liking of the House. So we still don't know what, if anything, will happen to get more cash into our roads, but we'll continue to follow it every Sunday morning when you join us at 10 o'clock right here to the point.